chapter 23, starting to read at verse 23. It's about there. It's nice to have the Pew Bibles back again, isn't it? Am I only a God nearby, declares the Lord, and not a God far away? Who can hide in secret places so that I cannot see them, declares the Lord. Do not I fill the heaven and earth, declares the Lord? I have heard what the prophets say who prophesy lies in my name. They say, I had a dream, I had a dream. How long will this continue in the hearts of these lying prophets who prophesy the delusions of their own minds? They think the dreams they tell one another will make my people forget my name, just as their ancestors forgot my name through Baal worship. Let the prophet who has a dream recount the dream, but let the one who has my word speak it faithfully. For what has straw to do with grain, declares the Lord? Is not my word like fire, declares the Lord, and like a hammer that breaks rock in pieces?
The second reading is from the Gospel of Luke. It's chapter 12, verses 49 to 56. So Luke 12, 49 to 56. Not peace, but division. I have come to bring fire on the earth, and how I wish it were already kindled. But I have a baptism to undergo, and what constraint I am under until it is completed. Do you think I came to bring peace on earth? No, I tell you, but division. From now on, there will be 5 in one family divided against each other, 3 against 2, and 2 against 3. They will be divided, father against son, and son against father, mother against daughter, and daughter against mother, mother-in-law against daughter-in-law, and daughter-in-law against mother-in-law. He said to the crowd, when you see a cloud rising in the west, immediately you say, it's going to rain, and it does. And when the south wind blows, you say, it's going to be hot, and it is. Hypocrites, you know how to interpret the appearance of the earth and the sky. How is it that you don't know how to interpret this present time?
Thank you very much to my 2 lesson readers, and thank you to everybody who's joined in any way in preparing or leading this service this morning. I love coming to Trinity because you all work as a team so well. Really appreciate it. I'm going to break one of my normal rules this morning. When I was training, they said to me that you should never let a congregation know if preparing a service or a sermon has been difficult. Just present a seamless product. I do, on the whole, adhere to that. But sitting down last Monday or Tuesday morning, whenever it was, looking at a blank screen on my computer and wondering what on earth I was going to write, for once caused me a bit of amusement. I had to chuckle to myself a little when I looked for some inspiration in my Luke commentary by Leon Morris, and it said, and I quote, the meaning of this passage is far from obvious. It's all right, it did go on and help a little bit then, but you don't say. But never mind, I was keen to preach from the lectionary today, and so here goes. Maybe part of the difficulty to which the commentator refers lies in a persistent perception of Jesus as being sweet and gentle. Some of us older folk who were brought up on the old Methodist hymn book, the 1933 one, will have sung Charles Wesley's hymn, Gentle Jesus, Meek and Mild, at Sunday school. And when it comes to kindness, compassion, love for others, yes, this is how Jesus is. But isn't this the same Jesus that beat the traders out of the temple and continually condemns the religious leaders of the time? Did he not often talk about his impending suffering and death? And here he is now saying he's come to bring division to the earth, not peace. And I found there was another little difficulty in trying to marry up the earlier and later parts of the reading, which don't entirely seem to bear much resemblance to each other. But the big question is always, what does it mean for us today? Let's think about division as opposed to peace. The passage opens with a reference to Jesus coming to bring fire. In this occasion, that could be a synonym for judgment. But the judgment that Jesus brings may be interpreted as judgment on himself, at least sometimes, rather than other people. It's a judgment that he will bear for others in his suffering and death. In a sense, although the prospect of the cross constantly hangs over Jesus, in a way he wants it to come to him despite all the agony that's going to be involved, because it's the means by which he will complete God's work, bring redemption. But he then continues saying that he has come on earth to bring such a degree of dissension that, as he puts it, a family of 5 will be divided. But surely he cannot mean this absolutely literally. John verse 34, he elevates to the level of a new commandment that we must love one another as God and Jesus love us. And yes, he means it. But maybe it's inevitable that following Jesus will bring some divisions. We know only too well what a good deal of the world thinks of us as we continue to follow him. And I've known instances of individual families where views of Christianity are very varied. I remember that when I was in the 6th form at school, one of our teachers who taught us for general studies happened to remark one day that he was an atheist who was married to a practicing Catholic. I remember wondering how that worked out in their day-to-day life. And over many years, I've seen plenty of examples of one marital partner regularly attending church and becoming involved in all sorts of activities beyond just Sunday worship, whilst the other partner has no involvement at all. This can work if each of them respects the view of the others, but in some cases, I've been aware of it causing friction. So does this remind us that following the will of God will have a cost? And if so, to whom? It's stating the obvious, really, to say that there was a tremendous cost to Jesus himself. He was born without a silver spoon. He and his earthly family were obliged to flee into temporary exile in Egypt when King Herod wanted to take his life. He spent 40 days in the desert and was tempted by the devil. He was subjected to endless harassment by those who were against what he was trying to accomplish. And ultimately, he went through the torment of crucifixion. But does humanity have its own cost to pay as well? Following on from the words of the prophets, the Jews believed that a king would come, but thought he'd be a powerful figure who would free them from the perceived tyranny of the Romans, using force if that was necessary. But what they found was a king who exhorted them to act as servants, to love and forgive, to turn away from everything they were used to and follow him. And they were told to turn away from their sins on pain of possible death. Not quite what they were expecting, and a salutary instance of the cost of following Jesus. And there will be cost involved in a good many things that we do nowadays, even sometimes in relation to good things. Who remembers the television series Fame? It was on in the 1980s. We loved it, I remember. It was set at a school for performing arts in America, in New York, I think, and followed the progress of several of its students. But every episode began with one of its teachers saying to a group of students, "Fame costs. This is where you start paying." And it's not just fame that costs. Dr. Eustace Chesser, who was an eminent psychiatrist of a generation or two ago, told in one of his books about a man who went on a skiing holiday and at the start of the week was slipping and sliding all over the place, just as the other members of his group were. But then he made quite astonishing progress. And by the end of the week, he was becoming very proficient. But then he noticed in the latter part of the week that the group with whom he'd been so friendly at the start didn't seem to be welcoming him quite as readily to the bars or social events in the evenings. And then he realized because he'd become so capable at skiing, whilst others in the group had stayed at a fairly elementary stage, he wasn't one of them anymore. Actually, he was more concerned about developing as a skier than having a good social time. But it made him think. And so if ordinary earthly things can come at a cost, how much more will it sometimes cost to follow Jesus and the will of God right through our time? But even as we ponder this, let's give thanks that Christianity has survived to the present day and goes on, because there have been enough people in every generation who've been prepared to take the sometimes considerable risks involved in ensuring its continuation. Jesus himself, to me, doesn't quite reflect on risk in the passage, although he may mean that. But I was looking at a volume of a companion series of books relating to the Revised Common Lectionary. And in today's prayers, there were some in today's pages, there are some prayers of thanksgiving, which clearly pick up the risk element. Risk is an element that in some aspects seems to have a bad press today. In my various workplaces, particularly in the latter stages of my working life, the words risk assessment sometimes loomed large. After spending many years in the National Health Service, I was employed towards the end of my working life by Prudhoe Town Council. And I remember a colleague being tasked with organising a social get-together. Now, at one time, all he'd have done was book the venue and let the people know who it was intended to go. But this time, before those who oversaw the venue would confirm any booking, they wanted a many page risk assessment to be completed. Now, I'm not knocking risk assessments. Efforts in public life to eliminate risk or reduce it as much as possible are entirely understandable. And I imagine that our churches have prepared excellent risk assessment documents in recent years. But can we completely eliminate risk in the Christian life, and is it desirable to do so? Do we sometimes need to take risks in worship if it's not just to be a sort of week-by-week ritual? Way back in the days of the old Brighton and Prudhoe circuit, a preaching colleague who'd been on trial was coming to the end of that period and had reached his trial service. That is a service that's assessed in a lot of detail as part of the local preachers' meeting agreeing whether the person on trial is ready to be recommended to the circuit meeting for admission as a fully accredited local preacher. Anyway, at this service, the on trial in question arranged for one of the Sunday school children to read one of the lessons. This was a child who'd never read out loud in church before, but wanted to try it. When the service report finally appeared, one of the assessors commended the on trial for being willing to take the risk of agreeing that the youngster in question could do this. And much wider risks will have to be taken if the church is to carry the name of Jesus forward to future generations. We know that many out there would be glad to see the back of us, and some people feel that the church should kind of know its place. Look at the furore that broke out last Easter when the Archbishop of Canterbury criticised the government's plans to deal with some immigration issues by sending some intending immigrants to Rwanda. Now, I concern myself less with whether people agree or disagree with the Archbishop than the reaction of some who clearly think the church should stay in its little box. There have been other instances over the years, but surely the church has as much right as any other group to speak out and has a duty to challenge the many injustices in society. To keep this vital work going will involve risk, as will many of our other activities. But we need to be prepared to take risks without being completely reckless, of course, if we're to move forward and play our part in continuing the work of spreading the good news of Jesus. Now, I'm just going to turn to those last three verses, which seem a bit different from the others. Yes, the Jews were weather-wise, as communities ancient and modern have had to be. And in this very dry summer, we're having to learn to be too. But concentrating on the here and now of things like the weather while ignoring the character of the times, which are ultimately more important, perhaps showed how the Jews missed the warning signs of what would come a few decades later in AD 70, when the city of Jerusalem was all but destroyed by fire. One hopes and prays that we won't live to see anything as drastic as that happening in our day-to-day lives. But is it possible that we can get so bogged down in trivia that we can miss the wider picture? This surely happened sometime in church life and sometimes out of it. Before I came to Northumberland, I worked for 3.5, nearly 4 years at a large hospital in the Midlands doing my first junior management post. And the team of managers had a weekly business meeting. On one such occasion, a good discussion on a topic of national importance was immediately followed by a 20-minute argument about whether hospital volunteers should or should not be given biscuits with their concessionary cups of tea and coffee. Talk about bringing us back down to earth. And we can fall into a similar trap within church too. I'm sure I'm not alone amongst those who sometimes choose hymns or songs for services, for being criticized for putting in the odd less familiar item, or even suffering a hymn to be sung to the wrong tune. Once upon a time at a church not too near here, it wasn't in Hexham nor Prudhoe, I got involved in quite a heated discussion about which tune we were going to use for the beauty of the earth. I ultimately lost that particular argument. I knew another church where the penalty for taking biscuits from the wrong tin verged on excommunication. But to hark back to my school days for a second time today, I once had a sixth form Latin essay. For some stupid reason, I did A-level Latin, but I had an essay returned to me with, amongst other things, the comment, try to weigh up better what is important and what is not. Is this something we can do in both the church and the world? It's not an easy prospect because establishing what isn't important can be very subjective. What's important to me might be less important to you or vice versa. But there must be some general principles to which most people would subscribe. For what it's worth, I'd like to suggest that our important work is likely to consist of spreading the good news of Jesus, showing his love to the wider world, fighting injustice and relieving want wherever we can. And sadly, this looks as though it might become an even bigger task than it's been before. Other people may put things in a slightly different order, but let's work together in love to do all we can to make a real difference and make sure there is still a flourishing church for those who will follow us in years to come. Amen.